The Board Policy Committee meeting, February 19th. Are we properly posted, Lynn?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. No citizens are visiting with us to speak, and we don't have bright lights. We do, however, have some action items today. And let me get to those. The first one is the minutes from our meeting from last month.
And I make a motion that we approve them as presented.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Seconded by Barbara. Any questions about the minutes? All in favor of accepting the minutes, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That passes 3-0. Okay, now, we have for us tonight three policies that are having some kind of a revision. And later on, we will have to just briefly remind ourselves about the policies that went for the first reading last week at the board meeting. The three policies that we're talking about revisions, we'll go over those in our usual manner. I just want to point out, these would be policies that would, if we go ahead with our plans, would fit into our first category of policy approvals that we could eventually do at the committee meeting.
That's correct.
So let's go through those. Policy 2260.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, 2260, and then 2260.01. I'm not trying to combine too much stuff, but the language that's being added to both of these policies comes directly from the Office of Civil Rights and puts us then in compliance with what their expectation is. If you look through policy 2260, again, minor change, they take off, instead of Board of Education, they take off the of Education, clarify some language under student evaluation for grammar purposes. They talk about, instead of having district compliance officers, they're specific to Title IX compliance coordinators. And then on the last page, it really gets into its substantive changes, where in particular you see the addition of the section retention of investigatory records and materials. That is the addition which truly allows us to remain in compliance with OCR's expectation.
And up above that, we have
the addition of
the addition of where it says that either party can have an issue with it.
Yep.
Okay. Just dawned on me, I talked about what these, yes, all of the ones that are under the retention of investigatory records and materials are mandated.
This is all mandated.
So this
Correct.
whole,
All the changes that you see are mandated,
Right.
with the exception, I guess the only part that's not mandated is on the first page where it goes from the Board of Education to the board, and that's the semantics through Neola.
so, as I said before, this is stuff that really does not fall into the debatable category. Anybody have any questions about anything that's in here? Barbara?
Joe, briefly, what do you see in this last part, retention of investigatory
I see,
records and materials? What do you
just
see?
the protection on three ends from the district, protection for the district, protection for the person who is alleging a complaint, protection for the respondent so that the district
Okay.
maintains all appropriate records after, or during and then after an investigation.
Okay,
These are the records that would be part of the investigation,
Correct.
not historical records.
Correct. So whatever comes up as part of that investigation is what you would be addressing. It is addressed within this. And the other part of that, the other part of this changes is when you do get a complaint that comes to the district, if somebody is not satisfied with what the district did, it then goes to the Office of Civil Rights. If you don't have this in there, the first thing they do is find you, you violated what their expectation is, and therefore you're automatically in the wrong.
so then is that information filed away and saved, that if ever there's a question, we can refer to it?
Correct.
Okay, that's good.
I do notice in here that there is a grammatic or a spelling error in the paragraph where it says all individuals. It says created and received as, it should say part of an investigation. It currently says pastort. Change that.
Thank you.
Right.
It does get a little tricky when you have the track changes on and you've got the underlining going when you're trying to do the text. Thank you.
Okay.
My
Diane?
question would be, with Christine Hedstrom's name listed in this document, do we say that as of the date that she's retiring, who the new person is, or we just have to change it after?
We, as
Transition.
administratively, we would be able to just make the change and notify the board that if Sharon Thiede, the new Director of Human Resources, assumes the investigation role in this, which I would propose she should, her name would just be added administratively, and it wouldn't have to come forward as a policy change.
Okay.
We do have the authority to do that.
We have had that authority in the past. yeah.
Correct.
That's
correct.
not
To
new.
change names instead of, if you were to delegate it to somebody else, these are very specific titles. If we were going to delegate this to the principal of Lowell Elementary School, using that as an example, then we'd really be getting into the change, and we would probably want to discuss that as a committee, but it's just transitioning from one person to the next in the same role.
Same title, same position. Okay. I was just wondering if that would be another one that would fit in the same category, that this would come back to us.
We would notify the committee that we did that,
Okay.
and then make that as part of the
Notify.
script for the president, or the chair of the committee to the board, so that the board would be notified.
Mr. Chairman, so when we vote, we're going to be voting on 2260.01 and 2260, is that correct?
No.
No,
We're gonna do one at a
2260,
time.
one at a time.
one at a time. All right, wanted to make sure.
So I will be looking for a motion
All right.
on 2260.
All right, I'll move to accept the revisions to policy 2260, non-discrimination and access to equal educational opportunity as presented.
I second the motion.
Seconded. Further questions or discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? 3-0. Lynn? Thank you. Okay. Now we're going to do 2260.01, which is substance, most of the same substance, slightly different, rearranged. By the way, the copy I have didn't have anything in color on it, so
Really? Because I have the red and the blue.
I have the red on the back.
I don't, well, it's the only one I have, because on the front, we were again eliminating the word of education, or, the
Oh,
word
yeah,
of
that's not,
education.
you're right, it's not red.
We do for as nice as it has been working with Neola, from time to time, we run into some technical difficulty within the drafting part of the program that we use with them.
It's not a big deal, I just wanted to make sure, I don't want to miss any, any other changes.
A lot of them are capital C, lowercase c.
Yeah, I got those in red, though.
Yeah, you're right.
And the change to this is, again, this similar to what the other policy was, where it talks about the complainant and the respondent. And then it also mentions in this policy now that if either party is not satisfied with the decision of the superintendent, what they're able to do from there. This does not have the records information, because that does not apply to this policy.
Right. So, a few simple changes again, all under category one of our group. Same thing with the name of the, Christine's name on here and Joe's name on here. So, any questions on this one? Somebody want to make a motion to approve 2260.01?
I move to approve the revisions to policy number 2260.01, section 504 of the ADA prohibition against discrimination based on disability as presented.
I'll second.
Good. Any questions, comments? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Oh, you did, okay. 3-0, Len? Thank you. Okay, and then we have, this is a different policy, but it's still a very, very straightforward one. Student suicide, Joe?
Yeah, when we drafted this policy a couple of years ago, we inadvertently left out the position of school social worker. Our school social workers play an integral role in help serving students in crisis and students who, have some mental health needs. We wanted to make sure that they were reflected in policy.
Would this be mandatory, or would this be something we have changed?
This was an
Typo?
error, this was an omission in our drafting when we did all those work sessions.
Right.
So it was our error, it was our omission, and what we're doing is adding it in there to make sure that people know that they can go to a social worker in the event that they're dealing with a
I
student
think
in
we have
crisis.
previously established, and might even be in a policy someplace, that things that are of that nature can just be done, right?
To make this change?
Yeah.
We could,
I know we talked about spelling and typographical
Right.
errors and stuff like that.
we just didn't want to,
Oh,
yeah, we didn't want to get into a situation where we were just sliding something into a policy and then sending a notice to you guys. If we noticed a spelling change, in the example that was mentioned before with Chris Edstrom, when Lynn and I talked about this, it was, do we bring it to committee, do we not bring it to committee? To be on the safe side, we decided to bring it to the committee. It doesn't change the purpose of the policy, it just adds a group of employees that can help out in these situations.
Once we approve it, then are we going to take it to the board? Okay. This will be a two reading, no, well, in the future, it would be the
Yeah, we'll talk about that change in the next
piece.
piece.
Okay,
Question, please?
yes.
So in other words, all school personnel, such as the administrator, psychologist, social worker, counselor, school nurse, should they all be involved? One of them be involved? See, I would involve all of them, but
Well,
I don't know that
we want to
means
make sure, so in the event that there's a crisis.
Yes.
We first want to make sure that the administrator is notified.
Right, absolutely.
And then beyond that, the administrators do a good job of managing policy and
Yes.
procedure in their school, but our psychs and our counselors and our social workers, and occasionally if a school nurse is present, a school nurse, those are individuals who would
Yes.
know how to interact with a student who is saying, I want to commit suicide. So we would want those individuals then to be alerted,
Any
alert the
or
principal.
all?
Well, alert the principal and
Yes.
then alert one of those individuals. You don't have to alert all of them. When we got into situations after there had been an intervention, after, parents were contacted and other resources were contacted, depending on the level of crisis, then we would want to bring a team around the students that may include a counselor, a social worker, a psychologist, a
Absolutely.
classroom teacher, a supportive group.
Yes,
After
yes.
the event, but this is while the event is going on.
Okay, got you.
Okay,
Okay.
so that is the only adjustment or change to this policy.
Any further discussion? Nope. And then I move to accept the revisions to policy 5350 on student suicide as presented.
Second.
Seconded. Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll have a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
3-0. Okay, excuse me. We have no information items. Now we have discussion items. Did you want to talk about how we're going to handle this one we just finished?
Yeah, so if you think about the timing of this, if the board at the March meeting approves the changes to the bylaws and the policies that we've put forth, then the March policy meeting happens after the board meeting. So these policy changes that we brought to you tonight would go to the March board for a first reading, but then they would come back to the committee, and the committee then would be able to say that, yes, these are good, or no, they're not. I mean, because it would have had its two readings then. What else would happen then at the March policy committee meeting, which would happen a week after the board meeting, is the nearly 50 policies that I'm reviewing with Darren and Chris and Jody and Todd and Steve and everybody else. Those then would come to the March policy committee for the first reading. Some of those policies would be approved by the policy committee. Some of those policies then would get forwarded onto the board. So we would then at that point, March into April, shift into our new
Implement.
practice, so.
And the timing for the March meeting, particularly with the first two that we had here tonight, I will be able to point out to them, after we've spent 3 or 4 minutes going over these, that with the new change in the other policy, we wouldn't have to do this.
Correct. All of these,
Multiply the 3 minutes by 30.
right, you could
No, you
be, I mean,
said 50.
and that's,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's the, that is the rationale for trying to make this
Of course it is.
adjustment,
We need to
because,
remind them.
what we've done is we've tried to spread it out. In so doing, we've been probably 4 months or so behind other districts that are using Neola, who use a much more expedited policy practice. And so we can get onto a regular cycle of review and approval as those policy updates come up. And that we really want to be in that position. Administratively, I would like to be there. I'm sure as a committee, you would like to be there
Yeah,
too.
and I think it's important, we didn't get any backlash at the last board meeting towards this idea. I was kind of surprised.
Yeah.
Apparently accepted. We'll see. So actually, given what I just said, relative to 0131.1 and 0155, there was no discussion, no subsequent discussion after it was presented at last week's board meeting for what would be the first reading. So I anticipate, or we can anticipate, that at the March board meeting, we will do the second reading and the approval with probably very little discussion.
Probably.
Great.
Another component of this was to increase the number of members of this committee because of its,
Not yet.
after the election, after the new,
As an administrator, I mean, when the board president seeks input on committees and whatever, I would be talking to Todd about proposing that this become a 5-member committee, only because the committee has some final authority on certain policies. And based off of how our committees are set up, F&F and teaching and learning in particular, those 2 committees have 5 members, which is a majority of our board. And therefore, it would be nice to have 5 of the 9 members sitting on this committee to.
We have to find 2 more people that don't work after 4 o'clock.
Can always do 6 a.m.
No way.
Well, okay, that's,
but that's something we don't have to talk about at the board.
don't
It'd
have
just
to-
be something that'd be decided
It- 'cause
as the
that-
new committees are assigned.
Right, those committee assignments are up, I think, up to the responsibility of the board president, including the number of members of each committee.
Okay.
Because if you guys remember, a
we
few
moved
years
this
ago,
from
we
3 to
had,
5.
and then 5 to
We
3.
weren't on the board yet. Right after we got into the Neola process, we realized how much was coming in and the amount of work. We made this 5-member committee, 1 year then?
2 years.
2 years.
2 years, we were a
2
5-member
years it was
committee.
a 5-member committee.
Yes.
Okay.
Then I believe it was after the last election and then board reorganization, we went back down to a 3-member committee.
That's correct, well, that's when you got on.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong, I love the 4 o'clock meetings.
Great.
So, yeah, it would be nice if we could keep this time.
For me,
But if we went to 5 or 5 members, we may have to adjust.
maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, it depends. Recommendations for future committee meetings? Anybody, anything you've noticed that we need to be talking about policy-wise, other than what the stuff is piling up on your desk?
No, from a policy perspective, things go as well as they get implemented, right? I mean, so when people call, we direct them to policy. What is in the policies has been very beneficial for our system.
Yeah.
It's helped in a number of areas. It's also helped under review of things, any legal review that we've had to do. Our policies have been in compliance. You notice that I'm not running to you saying, please change this as quickly as we can. So we're in a good spot there. From a workflow perspective, again, there's going to be a lot that you'll see in the next few months. As I'm reviewing it with administration, a lot of those changes are legal updates. For instance, the United States Department of Agriculture just released some updates with food safety. We just had some updates come from the Fair Labor Standards Act that will apply to 3 policy series. So you'll see that coming. But you know, from a day-to-day standpoint, I think we have on the books what we need. You know, and I think we're in a good position that if there were something that would come up in our community, or based off of the processes that we have in place, plus what we're proposing with this change, we'd be in a good spot to really entertain and pay attention to something that would truly be unique to Waukesha. I know for a while there was a policy on the books about uniforms. There was a practice in place on
Yes.
uniforms. When we did the revision, we eliminated that policy because it was not talked about in a decade or more. But should that topic ever come up, should people want to talk about that, we have the old policy language in our archives, if we ever needed to go back to it. But that would give this committee and the board a good opportunity to really focus on something that would be uniquely Waukesha. And then by not having 50 policies sitting in front of a board, people would be able to pay attention to the one then, or the 2 that really, really count.
That's a good part of it, too, yeah.
That's good.
All right. Anything else for anybody else? Other as needed?
Anticipating, how long should we put in our calendar for our next meeting in March, with 50 over
You know,
March and April?
we've got an hour long, generally we have an hour blocked off. That's kind of mentally what I have prepared.
Okay.
I've often said and joked around with Bill that, you know, the meeting will go as long as you guys want it to go. So when we're entertaining a large book of policies, again, a lot of them are going to be legal. You guys do a really good job of reading ahead. And if you note your questions down there, we'll do a good job of saying, based off of a change in federal law, the proposed changes are being, those are ones where we have very little wiggle room, and you guys would want to have an understanding. We'd put that in the script for Bill when he goes to the full board to read. There will be some where we're saying, hey, we're maybe making a change into grading. I'm just using grading as an example. I'm not proposing any changes to grading. But where you guys would want to pay some attention, where we would have to have a good discussion on what that grading change would be. So it could take an hour, it could take 2 hours. If you guys did your homework and didn't have any questions, it could take 15 minutes.
Right.
It's hard for me to say, but
Right.
I'd anticipate a good hour at the next one.
Good question. But we try hard on that, and I do appreciate the fact that you come in having read them.
Well, that's right. Being prepared is very important.
Good thing. All right. With that, I guess we may adjourn the meeting. Thank you.